I think, in general, not to sort of make sweeping statements for my fellow colleagues, but I think, at least for me as a historian, I would say I'm fighting, a lot of what I do is fighting different myths, like the myth of whiteness in classical music and the myth of whiteness in Europe. And I've had my own experiences with both of those, I would say. So one story that comes to mind is me going to Bayreuth to do research on Wagner, who's one of the sort of people I look at, and walking to the archive, because I go to archives all the time for my own work, where I find, dusty old documents that smell, and then sort of transcribe them and write them down. So I'm on my way to the archive, my first day at Bayreuth at the sort of Richard Wagner Museum, and someone stops me, like a sort of white German stops me, and it's like, what are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I'm here to do work at the Richard Wagner Museum. And he looks at me, he's like, why? I say, well, I'm a musicologist and a historian, and I'm here to look at Richard Wagner's documents. And keep in mind, we're speaking German the whole time, because I speak fluent German, because I grew up in Vienna, Austria, and I sort of identify also as Afro-German, but that's sort of, so we're having this conversation, and I'm like, well, I'm a musicologist, and he looks at me, he's like, but you look like you're African, as if somehow that would stop, as if Africans can't do musicology or something, and I say, no, I'm African American, and he's like, how is that possible? And I'm like, oh, like at the time I was like Barack Obama, like that was sort of what I could use to sort of explain it. Right. So, and then he was like, oh, okay, I see now. But the thing that I thought was so interesting was a sort of refusal to, like his like befuddlement as to why I would be interested in Richard Wagner. And then the only way I could explain my identity was by saying I was African American, even though we were speaking the entire time in German. Right? So that's sort of all the different layers, I think, of sort of the myths I feel like that I'm constantly fighting against, of sort of classical music as white, as Europe as white, and all of that. So that's the story that sort of most resonates with me. The other one is just going to German archives in general, and them asking me if I'm the cleaning lady all the time. That happens a lot.
So, the European connection for me is one that has made me think a lot about my identity. Growing up in the United States, I played piano since I was 5 years old by ear, and my piano teacher put me in chamber music camps. I met lots of people in my undergrad. One of my friends who was a composer saw some of my compositions and said, you should be a composer, so I started to double major. That completely changed my life, and as soon as I started composing more professionally, while still keeping up my identity as a pianist, and then later adding improvisation with voice and other instruments, and adding a digital element to my improvisational practice. This increased my identity and also increased the responsibilities that I had to maintain my identity. On the flip side, I was born in Virginia. I grew up in Providence, Rhode Island, but I would spend summers in Virginia. Then I went to school for 6 years in Boston. I had a stint in Boulder for 5 years before moving to the Netherlands in 2013. And to add more to that, my mom loved easy listening. My dad loved Motown. My brother loved gangster rap. And I was just this weird kid playing classical piano. And my friends loved alternative rock and metal. And I just loved all of it. I was super curious about all of it. And that also adds to your responsibilities. You have to keep up with the Beyoncés. You have to keep up with the Opeths, right? You have to keep up with the Xenakises as well as the Bachs. So for me, I've had multiple homes in the metaphorical sense and in the literal sense.
I know in the UK we tiptoe around things. Nobody really says what they mean half of the time, and you have to just sort of absorb what you think people mean when they talk about something specific. And people never talk about money or what colour you might be. That's something that doesn't really get talked about. It's getting talked about now for the very first time in my very long career. And so I didn't know, well, I mean, I think I had heard that musicians earn upward of £150,000 a year, dollars a year. You said 170, 180, 190,000 dollars. Well, in the United Kingdom, principal cellist in the London Symphony Orchestra might earn £45,000 a year. Now, and if you, I mean, it's one of the things I mentioned in my lecture earlier, that, you know, if you're a musician, no one in their right sense goes into the music profession to make money, to be rich. It's like it's more like a vocation. We don't have a choice. You're either a musician or not. I mean, certainly in my case, I never thought about finances or economics or anything like that. I just loved what I was doing.
But I've had a great life in classical music. I spent almost 26 years as principal violist of the Chicago Sinfonietta. It's a wonderful run. But now all the other things that inform my creative life, I'm now able to embrace those things after retiring from the orchestra. But I don't see myself as a black musician. I don't see myself as a black composer. I don't see myself as a black filmmaker. I am black. That's all. That's all. That's what's happening here with the skin. But that's all that is. And I also don't believe in race. So there's another conundrum. You know, it's about culture. It's about absorbing. And we all have far more similarities than differences. So that thinking is what allowed me to just say, you know what? I am bad. I'm bad. And I'm not going to allow anybody else from the outside to tell me anything differently. Simple.